And even hearing it, it is so easy to refute what he was saying.
But the moment they say things like, we can disregard what the Bible says, what are you going to do to counter them? Because whatever text you use, they'll simply say, I disregard.
Well, then you're written off.
It's the whole, there's nothing less to discuss.
Even his somewhat of a buddy, guy's last name is Brown. We don't agree with him a lot, but he was all over Stanley too, saying that.
No, MacArthur will almost certainly bring this one up. He's already brought up the unhitching one, so. But it doesn't matter. Because if you want to appeal to the world, you'll get them for a time. It's very much like the burn with passion logic.
Yeah.
Think about it. It's unsustainable. I can't hold to that.
Yeah, it was astounding to hear it.
Here's the problem.
Okay, it's about time to start. Actually, it is 7 o'clock now, so we're supposed to have been started like right now. Look at this. Some are ready. Hey, Will. Before I forget, you get that email from that run Saturday. If you give some kind of notification, big number. Friday. So look at the email, and all I need is maybe kind of thing where you stuff on it, sign it, and I'll pick your. Then we're all set. Okay. Everyone working their way in? Thank you. It looks very diligent. Go ahead. It's one more day. This is it. It's cold from here on out. Cold and rain comes tomorrow and stays with us. Those of you that look forward to fall, this is what comes with it. So here it comes. All right. Now, immediately following the service, as immediate as we possibly can, we need a lot of help to try to get things arranged as quickly as possible. So the tables will need to be cleared, and then the tables brought downstairs. And then we need to start bringing chairs from downstairs up here and then start building the aisle or the rows so that we have a center aisle. That's the objective. So that'll be, and then we'll need the pulpit moved to one of the back rooms here, probably that one. Okay. But whoever does this, don't lift here. You've got to lift down here because this top will come off. That has happened a few times. That's why you never see me pulling up on the pulpit when I'm preaching. That would be odd anyway. The Lord's table will also need to be moved. And then we'll have the general structure ready. Decorations start, I know, this week. So looking forward to that group and that time coming up Saturday. All right. As far as notes are concerned, we're toward the bottom of page 41 and then working our way over to 42. We had 4 online, now we've got 3. So I lost somebody with my dull introduction, I'm sure. Turn to 1 Corinthians chapter 7. As I mentioned last week, it's interesting to see the section we've been dealing with kind of tucked in here, almost toward the center of the overall discussion of being married or being single, and in some other variations of the marriage part of this. And we were just beginning to get into the section that looks very confusing in light of the whole context. Number one, it doesn't seem like it fits very well, though it does. And then it looks a bit contradictory, where he uses a phrase like, those that are married are to live as though they are not. But there's several other things mentioned in there, and then there's a clarifier also given to let us know exactly what's being discussed here. So let's get the context here. I'm going to start in chapter 7, verse 29. But this I say, brethren, the time has been shortened, so that from now on those who have wives should be as those that had none, and those who weep as though they did not weep, and those who rejoice as though they did not rejoice, and those who buy as they did not possess, or as though they did not possess, and those who use the world as though they did not make full use of it. For the form of this world is passing away. And that's a very key, this and another phrase that's coming up are very key for us to understand. As far as the world is concerned and it being temporal, that's the point. No matter what situation you find yourself in, how you're utilizing the world, we never really are making full use of it because it's passing away anyway. Our focus and our heart is not there. That's essentially what's being stated. So regardless of your situation, your focus cannot be set on this side of eternity. We're here, we have responsibilities, but it's the time is short, and we'll deal with that phrase here in just a moment. So it does not warrant, regardless of how good it is or how bad it is, or even in the middle, how boring it might be, it's a short time, and our focus, it better not be distracted with it. Then he goes on, verse 32, but I want you to be free from concern. One who is unmarried is concerned about the things of the Lord, how he may please the Lord. This is his motive for that advantage of being single. You don't have the concerns, the rightful concerns of being married or having a family or things like that. So there's one advantage of being unmarried. But the one who's married is concerned about the things of the world, how he may please his wife. And his interests are divided. The woman who is unmarried and the virgin is concerned about the things of the Lord, that she may be holy both in body and spirit. But the one who's married is concerned about the things of the world, how she may please her husband. So this is a necessary focus for her. And those that aren't married don't have that necessary focus. It doesn't mean there's not some worldly concerns. Everybody has some of those. But that there's less if you are single. It's an advantage there. This I say for your own benefit, not to put a restraint upon you. I'm saying this not to somehow restrain you either way. That's not the purpose. But to promote what is appropriate. And then here's the other key phrase that I was stressing also last week. And to secure undistracted devotion to the Lord. That's married or unmarried. Either way, that's the point of why he's saying what he's saying. To secure an undistracted focus or undistracted devotion to the Lord, which is what's supposed to characterize our lives regardless of our circumstances. And again, if it's really bad and difficult or grievous, that cannot distract us from our devotion to the Lord. And if it's just super spectacular and wonderful, that cannot be allowed to distract us. If we're married and have a wife or husband and children, that cannot distract us ultimately from our devotion to the Lord. And if we are unmarried, that also should not then distract us from our devotion to the Lord. And we can get how either one could do it. Because again, as I stress, some people that are unmarried never learn a form of trust or contentment in that state. And all their focus is life will never begin, and I'll never have any form of satisfaction at all as far as life purpose unless I get married. And that is not a wise attitude for life. And I know there'd be a lot of people out there that say, well, I think I would say that differently, Don. We want to stress this. We want to promote marriage. Marriage is good. Well, let's keep with the tone of the text. And I know, just trying to deal with the person who would object, I know someone would say, yeah, but he was only talking about in difficult times. I don't think you can make that case stick. I think it was difficult times, and that may impact the decision, but this could be across the board for anyone, because then he ends the section there with the father of a young lady who's never been married. But if any man thinks that he's acting unbecomingly, this is verse 34, toward his virgin daughter, if she is past her youth, then oh no, she's past her youth, and I didn't get her married. It's just a terrible thing. And I would imagine a lot of people would agree that, yeah, you haven't. Maybe the parents don't feel grieved over this. Maybe they do. But there will always be people who come along and say, you're not married? This is such a sad thing. But no. What does it say? And if it must be so, let him do what he wishes. He does not sin. Let her marry, if that's the case. But he who stands firm in his heart, being under no constraint, but has authority over his own will, and has decided this in his own heart to keep his own virgin daughter, he will do well. You're fine. Either way. Now notice how this is handled in the text. I know a lot of people, again, I've got this objector raising their hand quite a bit, but the objector would say, this is a cultural thing, Don. No, one of the things we're going to be noting in the service Saturday is this is a covenant. And what's interesting about part of the process in the covenant of marriage is, why does the father hand over his daughter? What's the purpose there? Can't they just, we just like each other and that's just the way it is? The purpose is, this is a covenant, and the covenant is before God. It is following his structure. So before the young lady is married, she is under the covenant, as it were, protection, authority, counsel, however you want to look on it, of her father. That's how it normally would be, considering God's institution of marriage, and then the symbolism that's represented in then when the father gives his daughter to be married to this man, then this man comes down, takes her, and they come up, and then the process of a new covenant being completed is the marriage ceremony. So this is why it's addressing the father. He doesn't say, now, young ladies, if you're not married, keep your attitude straight. I think that's certainly implied everywhere else. But now he's dealing specifically, I think it's interesting, with the father. You've not done well, or you have done well. So which is the case there? Well, if you have her marry, that's okay. Let her marry. But if your will is firm and you don't see that she ought to be married for whatever reason, you've done well also. There's nothing wrong with it. And I kind of wonder how many people would raise their hands in objection to this whole notion and say, absolutely not, because a young lady was born to be a wife and mother. And I wish that was just an exaggeration, but it's not. I have faced this in many fairly conservative Christian circles most of my life, where that was, well, that's what they are. No, it may not be. Why do we immediately yield that point and then you just prepare them to be a wife and mother? Maybe they're not. One thing's for sure, they are the Lord's, and there's where their primary focus ought to be. And if they marry, they may not be necessarily the best cook or the best home organizer or whatever, because we haven't spent all our time focused on that. But they hopefully are truly those characterized as having an undistracted devotion to the Lord. Now that, with a man or a woman, is a great catch. That's an excellent, excellent characteristic of somebody. So, the summary there. So then both he who gives his own virgin daughter in marriage does well, and he who does not give her in marriage will do better. And there's no way to look around that there as far as this whole focus on her core purpose in Christ of that undistracted devotion. She will have an advantage, and that advantage will be less of a concern about the things of this world. So Paul's words, not mine, and I don't want to pull away from that at all. Verse 39, a wife is bound as long as her husband lives, and if her husband is dead, she is free to be married to whom she wishes, only in the Lord. And there's the only case you find clearly noted in this text, clearly noted for remarriage. And that's if the spouse dies. In this case, it's really talking about the wife. If her husband dies, then this is what she can do because he was just dealing with the virgin daughters. Then she is free to remarry if only it's in the Lord. And in my opinion, she is happier if she remains as she is. That would be single. And I think that I also have the Spirit of God, in other words, in this conclusion. And this is the right thing. So, probably don't hear a lot of these things, a lot of these Christian conventions, a lot of the homeschool conventions and things like that, where a lot of this was often put forward. And I'm not against young ladies preparing to some degree to be a wife and mother, but that is secondary. The primary focus is the same for all of our children, and that is that undistracted devotion to the Lord primarily. And then if they do marry, they'll hopefully keep that undistracted focus, even though they now have added concerns for the things of this world. So that's, I think, a good synopsis of what was being dealt with here. But before we get to that final conclusion, we're now where we left off last week as far as how we're supposed to live our life overall. If you're married, as though you're not married. If you've purchased something as though you really haven't purchased it, or if you are using things of the world as though you're not actually fully utilizing them, and why he stated those things, because these things are passing away. The form of them, he said. So toward the bottom of page 41.3, Paul then uses this situation, everything he's been talking about so far, as a means to stress the importance of living with the reality of the shortness of time. The reality of the shortness of time and the impact it should have on our time here. This is across the board always good for every generation, because no matter how we look at it, time will go by fast. There's times where it doesn't seem like it, especially when we're young, but it will go by fast. And it's not that long in the whole scheme of things. It's not worth giving our heart over this side of eternity to the temporal things here as though all our joy, all our focus belongs here. Oh no, some of it does, but very little. Most of everything we see in light of its eternal purposes, including the people we interact with, including our vocations, where we're at in life. That's why we're not giving our entirety of our lives over to having the best career, the best of homes, the best of cars, the best of everything. And so much of our time is spent doing that, even in our Christian circles now. We're just spending so much time and effort, and they're just trying to get to this point when it goes by so fast. And then a lot of these things, like the student loan type thing, keeps coming up in the news, and people having these huge loans, so they finally do all this to get the ideal job, and then they get to the other side of that, and then it takes a super long time to pay those off. And it's like so much of their life has been spent preparing to live, and then when they finally get to that state, it's almost halfway over. And then there's still no guarantees, because I'm just adding some commentary here. Now that just about everybody has some kind of college degree, it just doesn't seem to have the advantage everyone thought it would have. Because now you can get a college degree almost anywhere. I'm amazed at the number of people around me that have master's degrees. There's some other people that I've worked with that not too long ago got their PhDs. And they're still working their low, lowly jobs. It just struck me interesting. It's just in my experience that's how it workked out. Can't think, what a disappointment to have so much time and effort. Doesn't mean if someone gets their PhD for whatever reason, doesn't mean that they're automatically distracted. Or if someone has a super job or whatever, that there must be distracted. But the likelihood of it is there, and we know it. But just as important for us to consider, as I've stressed before in other studies, even a very, very poor person can have their life overwhelmed with covetousness. All they do is spend their time longing for a better life, better things. It's all they want. And on the other side of that too, they're bitter over not having these nice things. And it's a life of envy and covetousness. It's a miserable life. We're not supposed to think that way. Point A under number 3 there, at first glance, verses 29 through 31 that we started with. At first glance, these verses may seem confusing, But because of the irony of the language, it is clear that Paul is stressing not just a reality, but a basis for prioritizing these realities. Here, you might be married, so you live in light of that, but here's how you're supposed to look at this in light of eternity. Off to the left, this phrase, as though you are not, in several instances here, which we'll get to in a moment. This phrase may also be making the point that the time ahead of us, as far as the world is concerned, is now less than the time behind us. We have been born, most likely, late in time. And that most of God's plan for this creation, for mankind and everything, most of it has come and gone. And there's very little, if we look on it from that scale, very little ahead of us. Now, we might say, well, maybe there's only 1,000 years left, and in the whole scheme of things, that's not really much time. For us, of course, that's about 10 lifetimes for us. So it seems like a lot, but as far as the whole scope of things, it's really not much then left ahead of us. History is now further off than the end of the world ahead. So the end is so much closer, very close, where this age will be done. Time will be finished, and then the Lord's kingdom established. And in light of that, it does seem like a pretty major waste of time and effort to make it so that we give most of our time and effort to this age and to the shortness of time. This is, again, fundamental. This isn't like a nuanced thing for super dedicated Christians. This is supposed to be for all of us. None of us, when we stand before the Lord, will regret that we spent most of our focus on His work, His priorities, our relationship with Him, and our responsibilities in light of it, rather than not having given more time to build our careers and our standing in this life. I mean, do we honestly think we're going to stand before the judgment seat of Christ and say, look what I did. I worked my way up that ladder. I got the best of possessions out there. I had a pretty good reputation with everybody because of my prestige. I wrote several books and I was showcased in several things as far as a truly successful life. I don't think that that's anything that will even cross our minds. Because the focus there will be, what did you do for me? Because your life was about me. I saved you. You are mine. You were set apart. That's the whole sanctification for my purposes. What did you do with that? Again, this is Christianity 101. It's not like some super nuanced teaching in Christianity that a few groups of people come across. No, this is for all of us. Because each of us will have that time before the judgment seat of Christ. What did we do? Where was our focus? What were our priorities? So this ought to be on our minds, and I think it's interesting how Paul has dealt with this in light of what many people think is the ultimate pinnacle of life, and that's marriage. And it is, humanly speaking, for many of us, a pinnacle of this side of eternity. But it's by no means the ultimate pinnacle of our lives, because our lives are focused beyond the veil and our responsibility and our relationship with the Lord. The meaning of the phrase, the time has been shortened, has two popular handlings. One, that it references the soon or imminent return of Christ. And the second, it was a reference to the actual shortness of time that we have on this earth. I'm inclined to think that that's more of the focus there. No matter how old we get, if I live to be 100, that's really not much time if you compare it to history. And certainly if you compare it to eternity, all you have to do is put it on an eternal timeline. I don't know how that would look. And the further back you get, soon you don't even see it. You still see the eternal timeline, but you don't even see your little blip in this side of eternity. The underlying word there for shorten, I just think it's interesting for a word picture there. If you look at the prefix, Greek students, soon, that usually means together. Estalmenos, soon estalmenos, was only used one other time. I think it's interesting. Shortened. It was used in Acts 5:6 describing the wrapping of Ananias' body. So it was wrapping it, constricting it, his body, that was the time it was used, tightening it up, as it were. The shortness of time is a reality, even if we live a seemingly long time on this earth, as is often realized by those growing older, though a lot of young people, it's easy, I still remember thinking that all the old people seem to say that sooner or later. Wow, time has gone by so fast, and I remember what I thought when I was young, hearing that on and off, and I thought, boy, not for me. It just seems like life is dragging on. Now that I'm older, I find myself thinking, and sometimes saying in different ways, wow, time is flying now. It's gone by so quickly. So the shortness of time is a reality, even if we live a seemingly long time on this earth. And this is so often realized by those growing older and sensing that time has passed quickly. It has passed quickly. That's a fact of life. Just if you're young and you're thinking, no, it's going slow, give it time. It's a funny thing to say in light of this topic. Give it time, and sooner or later you will think, wow, it has sped up, or at least it seems. And I've heard studies on why it seems like it gets faster. I don't particularly care to explain it. I just know that it is a pretty good sense on our part to sense that as we get older, the sooner the better. As was it Psalm 90, teach us to number our days that we may apply our hearts unto wisdom. Because if we realize my days are numbered, I'll be more careful in how I use them. Off to the left, it was also used of drawing together the sails of a boat, another version of this word, as it was preparing to dock. We're getting close to dock, pulling the sails, the end is near. That's also another usage of that underlying word. So because then of the fleeting nature of this life and our time here, our attitude and overall outlook on this life is to be directed to this fact, that it's short. The time is short. So those that are married, as has been the context of this chapter, are to live in a sense as though they are not married in light of the entire scheme of things. I have a marriage, I have responsibilities, but it is absolutely not the top priority. It is a top priority, but it is not the top priority. And I love to try to point this out often, that why is it a priority at all? Well, I ought to love my wife. Well, you should, but why? Well, because, happy wife, happy life. No. Why? Why should you? And a lot of people get to a point in their marriage where they think, I don't have to. And they just give up. And then they have a miserable time together. But no, why should I invest in my wife? Because I'm told to do it. Probably think, well, that sure doesn't sound romantic. But that is an underlying motive for it. Now, of course, if I love my wife and we have an excellent relationship, then there's all kinds of benefits with that all through life. And there's a great friendship and a bond that's there, and it just is wonderful. And that's an outcome, but the main reason is I'm told to do so in Ephesians chapter 5. And why does a wife love and care for her husband and respect her husband? Because she's told to do it. That's why it even says a wife is to submit to her husband as to the Lord. Not a wife submits to her husband because he's the boss. Some men would probably interpret it that way, but that's not what it says. She does it in her relationship for and with the Lord. That's why she does it. That's her primary reason. A lot of men would think, boy, my wife reverences me. That really tells a lot of people what a respectable person I am. But that's not necessarily true. It may mean that she's more focused on her responsibility before the Lord. So those who grieve is another thing that's mentioned here. Those who grieve are to live as those who do not grieve. In other words, the worst of the things that can happen here aren't the final thing. There's still so much more to come. And those that are rejoicing or celebrating because just somehow something in life is just so wonderful, they're supposed to live as those that have not celebrated, because it's not about this life. Doesn't mean we're not going to have happy times. Doesn't mean we're not going to have grievous times. We are. But none of those is the definitive thing in our life. And I think we kind of get this one. You ever come across somebody or ever been tempted to be this way or been stuck in this for a while, something bad happened, And it's like everything in life stops. And it's like we give up because this happened, whatever it is. And I'll never be happy again. I'll always be grieved, and it's over. That is a poor way of looking at life because it's not anticipating the future. I've often stated this, I say it a lot at the rescue mission, but it is one of the most sad things that I can think of if all someone has left are good memories. That's all they've got left. Wonderful memories. Love to talk about the past because there's nothing in their present or in what they expect their future that's of any encouragement at all to them. All they have are good memories. That is such a sad, sad condition to be in. We don't ever want to be at that point. We might have wonderful memories, but none of us, in light of what's coming, would ever think, boy, I wish I could go back. I wish I could go back to that. No, we don't. If ever the statement is true, it's true with us. The best is yet to come, no matter how good it gets. It's easy to, hopefully think that way when things are pretty bad, but the best is yet to come. It will only be infinitely better for all of us. That's one of the wonders of death. It will only improve us. That's a statement I've heard before a few times, and that's true. Death will only improve us. That's kind of a wonderful thing to be able to embrace because it's true. So we move on. Those are at least two other scenarios that were mentioned there. He goes on also, then those who purchased are to live as though they have never truly purchased anything. So do I have possessions? Well, as far as the world's concerned, I do have possessions. But do I really possess anything? No. We don't actually possess anything. Well, I've got certificate of ownership here. Yeah, give yourself a few years, and when you die, you can't take it with you, as is often stated. Just a reminder that we don't own anything. I don't even own myself. I can't even control that. I can't buy any guarantees with some investment throughout life. I don't even own myself. I don't have anything. So why go through life purchasing things and letting my life be defined by my purchases? These wonderful cars and things that we had. I thought of this today as I was driving home at the end of the day, and a little MG midget car came by. It was bright red. And that was the car that my dad had before the fire. And he had a black MG midget. He loved it. It was a sports car. I know people think that didn't sound like much of a sporty car. It was. Manual transmission, and it had all kinds of power behind it and everything. He loved that car, and it just fit what he was aiming at in his lifestyle. And then the fire came. It destroyed everything, including his sports car. And as he later admitted, that is exactly what he needed. God took it away. So I watched that car go by, and I thought, wow, he would have thought, wow, that was so neat to have that car. And then I remembered the fire. It's a nice little reminder there. No, it was a good thing to finally have lost for him, because it wasn't about that. Off to the left there of D, kind of up a little bit there, the phrase does not say that the time is short. The phrase actually just says it was shortened, and this also reminds us that there is an end to time. Either our own time, or the own time of the time in the world, or our own, I phrase that there, either our own time or the time the world and this age has left. Either way, it doesn't matter, because I can think, well, the world probably doesn't have much time, but I probably statistically have less than even the world has. I don't have much. You start creeping into these older years, and now I'm well past the mid-50s mark. You hear people say there's more time behind me than there's time ahead of me, and it's true. But for us, that's kind of a nice thought. That's kind of a fun thought to think. Okay, it will come to an end, this age, and that's something you and I long for. We still have loves and concerns here. Doesn't mean we hate our families and we hate this life. It just means the life to come, and the purpose of even while we're spending any time here is so much higher than that. So that when we think about the end of all these things, our heart doesn't skip a beat in fear, it skips a beat, or maybe beats a bit faster, in excitement. I think that's a far better way of realizing it. So point E, clearly Paul is not encouraging the married to no longer live as those that are married in light of the instructions already in this chapter. But in the overall thought process here, he's using a method of comparison. We are to be committed to our marriages, but never so much as to let them distract us from our full eternal purpose. Some people might try to find a way to use that as an excuse to then be a poor spouse, a poor husband, or a poor wife, or even poor parents. And that's not good, because then we're not obeying our Lord and our responsibilities that we have. But on the extreme opposite, where those are very good things, none of those are to be our fundamental purpose in life. We are to be committed to our marriages, but never so much as to let them distract us from our full purpose. As excellent as marriage is, and it is, as excellent as marriage is, it must not be what defines us. That's a big point. Because we live in a time, even especially in our churches, where marriage defines us. You're not married? How old are you? We can't find anybody? There's got to be somebody out there. But no, that's not what defines us. Or you are married? Well, then that clearly is something that is a key qualifier of your life. It does have some definition this side of eternity. But it does not, in the fullest sense, truly, ultimately define us. My relationship with the Lord, my eternal soul, made so alive by the work of Jesus Christ, that defines me more than anything else. And then that's what prompts me to have a good marriage and to be a good father and to be a good steward of what God is giving. Everything is seen through the lens of an eternal perspective. Everything is seen through that. Rather than looking at everything temporal, I want to be the best I can, and I'll look to Jesus to kind of help prove or improve my marriage, because that's really what most of my life is about, how we get it backward. And no wonder we're struggling in these things. No wonder there's a huge market for all these self-helps and these marriage counseling things and how to build your family right and all these endless points of counsel out there. But I think they're getting it backward. If we just keep this focus, truly our focus, maybe I'm oversimplifying it, I don't think we need all this extra stuff coming in. How to have some kind of tricky approach to rearing our children or fixing my marriage or something like that. No, I'll be an excellent spouse if I remember who and what I am and what my responsibilities are. And I look at everything through the lenses of my eternal responsibilities now, not from the temporal, looking to the eternity, hoping I can improve the temporal. Do you see what I mean? Maybe at least in a general way, of looking at life backward. I think it's why Paul put it in this context. It must not be what truly defines us. And in bold italic, with so much focus on families these days, family has become the goal, even more so than the focus that is to be on the family relationship with our God. And I can't stress this enough. Of course, we ought to have good families, but they're godly families, because I realize as a parent, I realize as a husband, this is my responsibility before the Lord because they are His. That's my main drive, not because I just have a warm affection for them. Hopefully I do. But I don't have to have that as the predominant controller of my life, because I understand whose they are and what my calling is and what my responsibilities are. But so much is now put on this. Everything is about family, and I wish this was an exaggeration, but I do believe, my personal thought is, that many people probably think, I have a good family, I've worked really hard, what a great family, we kept them all together, I'm a good Christian. Maybe not. Maybe family has become an idol, a god in itself. And even God must kneel almost, as it were, in some people's perspective, before the Almighty, holiness and sacredness of family. This sounds so weird to talk about it this way, but I think there's a pendulum swing that way, because for a while their families neglected, people didn't do what they were supposed to do, children were miserable, marriages were miserable. But the goal isn't to just have a happy marriage. How we get there is important, most important. Hopefully we are contented because of our relationship before God, and as a result of that, the marriage benefits from it. The family benefits from it. It is a perspective that we pass on, hopefully, as good parents to our children. This is how you look at life. Most people won't. Even in our churches, they'll look at everything else. And that's certainly something we have sensed over the years, this whole focus on prestige and a career and education, which are okay things, but they seem to be the top priority out there. Rather than where's the general discussion amongst our families when we're together about the relationship of our children before the Lord and our responsibility before the Lord and how we're working with them and in our marriage because it's before the Lord. Where is that anymore? Now it's how do you get the right school? How do you handle those loans? And how do you get them in the right job? And all these, because look at this family, they got their kids and they're just doing it right. Look at the education they're getting. Look at the jobs they're getting. Oh no, we don't compare. And we went over to their house. Did you see their house? It was so much better than our house. And these become the priorities. This is why I think Paul kind of clears the whole thing up quickly with this whole thing. It's not about the marriage. It's not about your possessions. It's not about if you're rejoicing or grieving in any given time. This age is passing away, and therefore we're not living for it. We ought to be focused on our family relationship with our God, and that then would involve even our family of those that are in Christ. This is why I keep stressing. When we look at each other, we all realize that the priority of our eternal relationship far, far, far outranks our biological relationships. It is so much higher. You and I are related eternally from our relationship in Christ. So there are natural bonds we'll have with those that are biologically related to us, and that's a God-given thing. But it's not the top bond. It ends at death. But our eternal one doesn't. We are eternally related, and we better treat each other as such. And that ought to be something that drives us when we realize who really are my family. You are my family. Like it or not, I'm your family. And it's all because of Christ. And this is how we're supposed to think. And this is what bothers me. We kept so much focus on our own personal families. My family becomes a competition with your family, and your family with mine, and my prestige with your prestige or whatever, and successes. And we end up not liking each other because our family is the focus, and it becomes one family versus another. And that's not at all what we're supposed to be about. We're all a family. None of us are competing with one another. There's no competition. What if I win? I haven't won anything. There's no success there. So if someone's not married, all right, they've got a huge family. In our church, some are married. We're all family. Some have terrible marriages. Okay, we're still family. There's so many benefits that come with this, and that's why our Lord stressed it the way he did there in Luke 14, which again is another one of those texts that makes people uncomfortable, but it is another text of comparison that our Lord demonstrated a true priority similar to what Paul is doing here. Luke chapter 14, starting at verse 25. Now large crowds were going along with him, and he turned and said to them, just here it goes, launches into this. Imagine the shock of hearing this. If anyone comes to me and does not hate his own father and mother and wife and children and brothers and sisters, yes, and even his own life, he cannot be my disciple. Whoever does not carry his own cross and come after me cannot be my disciple. In other words, anything in this life cannot even begin to compete with him. For which one of you, when he wants to build a tower, does not first sit down and calculate the cost to see if he has enough to complete it? Otherwise, when he has laid a foundation and is not able to finish, all who observe it begin to ridicule him, saying, this man began to build and was not able to finish. Or what king, when he sets out to meet another king in battle, will not first sit down and consider whether he is strong enough with 10,000 men to encounter the one coming against him with 20,000? Or else, while the other is still far away, he sends a delegation and asks for terms of peace, because he hasn't estimated the costs. He hasn't estimated the challenges that are there. So then, none of you can be my disciple who does not give up all his possessions. You can't be. And as I mentioned way back when I did this text some years ago, it's an interesting way, if he does not forsake, is the old English word there. It's an underlying phrase that means to properly put it in its place, in its order, a proper priority. So in other words, I have everything here, and as Paul was already getting at, it's as though I don't have anything. As far as the true value of life, it's all God's. It's all his. I'm a steward. That's why the stewardship concept there is so important for us to come to grips with. I don't have anything. I don't own anything. I'm a steward of what's been given to me. I treat it as such. That's how we're supposed to live, and that's then why he then goes on to ultimately then compare it to salt. Therefore salt is good, but even if salt has become tasteless, with what will it be seasoned is useless, either for the soil or for the manure pile. It is thrown out. He who has ears, let him hear. And that's the significance here. You're here as a distinguishing, contradictory part of this life. You don't blend in. You contrast it like salt does, and like light, as he also dealt with in the Sermon on the Mount. Off to the left of point E, the objective of these phrases is to stress the importance of not allowing the temporal to trump the eternal. The physical is not to be ranked more important than the spiritual. The physical is important here, but the here and now is not what we live for. We live in it, we have to deal with it, but none of this is what we live for. Even ultimately our families and these relationships. I live for the Lord, and if he has given me a family, given me a marriage or whatever, then I fulfill those responsibilities in light of my stewardship of what he's given. If he keeps us single, I live in light of the stewardship that he's given. And as Paul mentioned, there are some practical benefits this side of eternity not being married. And you live in light of that rather than all these seemingly well-intended Christians coming along and say, oh, you poor soul, you poor thing, you're not married. And so that's just the worst thing. You might go through life single. And they act as though it's like a curse of God. What did you do wrong? And they might think. And we don't help anyone with this type of focus. No one is aided in this, especially in Christianity, with this type of focus. Because it's not the ultimate life identifier. Part of it, and it's God's design. It's a wonderful, excellent thing. But it has its limits this side of eternity. I put that phrase underneath it there. The good has been allowed to usurp the best. The good has been allowed to usurp the best. Family's good, marriage good, living in this life, having things and doing things good. But they're not the best. The best is a focus on eternity. Point F, no grief then, dealing with the negative now, no grief on this earth is to be so significant that it comes to control our lives. This is a big one, because I would imagine many of us have come across someone, or maybe we've been tempted with this, to hit a spot in our life that it just looks like everything falls apart, and we're still alive, and we act as though life is over. I'll never get over that. Well, something happened in my past, and I'll never get over it. And so many people come up and say, oh, that's so sad. Oh, well. Not you and I, not as Christians, we'll never have anything like that. Well, what if? And then we put in all these scenarios. Well, what if that happens, and that happens, and that happens, and that happens? That would be the worst thing ever. Yeah, but it's not actually the worst thing ever. Not in light of eternity. Seems like you'll really be excited more so about eternity if that all happens, right? Rather than giving up on your responsibility here as though life is over. God will make it very clear when life is over. We'll know it. Until then, we don't ever act as though life is over, even if it gets really, really bad. So the whole grieving, no, live as though you're nothing to grieve about. Because we are eternal beings. This time it's been on purpose, shortened. We're not living eternity like we are, which we should be extremely grateful for. We will weep, but we are never given over to utter despair, since we realize this is temporal. That's what gets us through it. Oh, this hurts. It seems unbearable. Oh, this is grievous. Oh, I can't see past this sadness, but I will never flirt with despair. If God lets me live a lot longer past this horrible, grievous thing in my life, I will live, I'll be faithful, I'll be responsible, and oh, how encouraged I am that there is still so much to come. And that when this life is over, if I carry this pain to the end of my life, it will end there. But even with that pain to the end of my life, I will be faithful, I'll be responsible, I'll keep my focus on the other side of eternity. And that's how we're supposed to live our lives. This is, as I mentioned, fundamental to how we look at everything in life. This is how we're supposed to live, how we're supposed to think about everything. You get the point here. If we could actually think this way, what could discourage us? I mean, truly, take us out with discouragement, that kind of discouragement. What could knock us down? Nothing could. And you fill in the blank with whatever the worst scenario you can think of. And a lot of people might say, wow, my imagination was never that tragic. It still won't make it usurp what's coming in eternity. Because if it was never supposed to happen, certainly our Father, who knows everything and is righteous and is the true essence of what true love is, would never have let it happen. I've used that before with some people and they refuse to accept it. The one example I've given over and over, this older woman kept saying, oh, these bad things that happened in my past. I must have been 10 to 15 times talking with this person over and over again. And say, yeah, but God could have stopped it. Why didn't he? I don't know, but it was, no, God didn't. That means somehow, some way, he used it in the growing of you and likely to bring you to him. At the very least, that's something wonderful to celebrate, isn't it? Yeah, I guess it is. It's amazing how oftentimes we get to the point where we have something horrible in our past and all we want is people to come along and be shocked by it. And then just say, you've got a pass through life now. No one can ever criticize you for being irresponsible in anything because you have suffered greatly. And that's how a lot of people handle it. You have suffered so greatly now. You just coast out the rest of life because clearly you'll never get over that. Well, the world's certainly that way, but not us. Not even close to it. Far too often Christians will look to stop serving God in all sorts of capacities, excusing themselves because of their seemingly unbearable grief. Even Christians, and that should be the point where we say it that way. That's a shock to us. Christians shouldn't do that. I get it when the world does, but not Christians, as though somehow we are now excused because of all the grief that you have faced or whatever you've gone through. This often leads to forms of bitterness that are actually ultimately directed at God, and there is where we start to realize there's nothing healthy or excusable in that. Sometimes people are so good at expressing their great griefs and the horrible things that have happened, all they do is cause others who haven't suffered like that to start to doubt God. They even start to flirt with ideas, well, how could a loving God have allowed that to such a nice person, someone who'd given themselves over to ministry? Some years ago, I was talking with, after my dad died, an older couple that were at the college we were at, Jim and Rita Morganroth, and they came and we came back to the school after my dad's funeral, and it's our first meal in the dining hall, and they came out of their way and sat down with us. They knew my parents. They knew my grandparents. They had both lived in Cincinnati for many years and then became missionaries to Bolivia, and they were just such an encouraging couple to us. They were happy, vibrant, fun to be with, kind of an interesting dynamic in their marriage. And they reiterated the loss of their daughter when they were down in Bolivia as missionaries. And it was just a freak accident. And that some kids had a four-wheeler of some sort, and she got on it. They were going to ride somewhere, and she got on the back, and they were riding somewhere, and they hit something, and she fell off, and it killed her. They lost their daughter. And as Jim Morgenroth was talking about it there, he said, you never fully get over it, but you get used to it. You get used to it because of who we are. And that was, rather than sitting there and saying, we still question God about that. Here we had given up our lives. He was with the Cincinnati Fire Department for some years and gave up that life, went down with 5 children, which they were told, don't do that. Don't bring your children to this place. But they went down to Bolivia with 5 kids, and while they're down there, one of their daughters is killed because of this. And you just look at them and think, what a happy couple. What a happy life. And they still have devoted their life to the work of the Lord with not a hint of bitterness at all. I could see the sadness that was there. But what a comfort they were to say, even though it just looks like a horrible thing that God took your dad, but wow, he knows what he's doing, and life continues on, and we're faithful in this. And what a privilege it is to be serving the God that we do. We left that table encouraged. And they didn't stop there. They were a continual encouragement throughout the entire time I was in college. Off to the left there, if we live for the changeable, which is what this life reflects and demonstrates, if we live for the changeable, we will be changeable. And not only our life focus, but our life's resolves. A lot of people say, I used to be committed, I was resolved, I was focused, but, and then they tell you something, and now all the resolves and all their commitments have fallen apart because life didn't turn out the way they thought it should. Well, who made us God? Really ought to be the brutal response to that. Probably not the best way to start a conversation, but that's really how it ought to be approached ultimately. Who made us God? When did I ever think it was supposed to turn out like I thought it was supposed to turn out? All these dreams and all these aspirations, and everyone thought they were good goals. Maybe, maybe not. God will determine that. And even if they are good, don't let them become the top good, because all of these things are changeable. We are anchored in our souls to the unchangeable, the eternal, giving us a steadiness against the waves of change throughout our lifetime. And they are coming whether we like it or not. They're coming. I mean, I can remember when you were a child and you're thinking, I don't want anything to change. I want everything to stay the same. I used to have scary dreams sometimes about my parents dying. And I could never survive that. Or my brothers or sisters dying. Or some just horrible thing happened. I used to have all kinds of dreams. I'm probably a morbid kid to some degree with my dreams. And just trying to handle this. And yet, my parents are all gone. And we've gone through some difficult things. My dad died much younger than anyone would have expected. He's only 45. And we're okay. That's not a bad thing to say against him. We're fine. We're okay. God has mapped it out all just right. And then God gives us kids. I don't want anything to ever happen to kids. Of course, we don't want them to, but what if God has that? Will that crush us? It better not. And then as we get older, we start to lose our health, maybe our minds, other things that come. It's okay. We weren't living for this anyway. We are living proof. If we live long enough, we are living proof that the fashion of this world, the form of this world is passing away. Nobody can deny it. Things will continue to change. So we might have sentimental thoughts and things that we love, but we give them up. We let them go because it's not about these things. Let's not be so sentimental that we become bitter against God when things change. Let them change. Let it come. We're not living for this life. That's good counsel for us all to follow. So, last point here, point G. On the flip side, no joy on this earth is to be so cherished that it becomes the focal point of our living. And not just the present joys, but we are sometimes guilty of living for the past glories and finding satisfaction in our memories alone. That's what I started with. That's all we've got left. Life used to be so great, and now it's not. But I live off those memories. I have all the photo albums, and so I look back to the life when it was happy. Now you and I, we look at that, well, that was a nice memory there. Would you go back if you had the chance? Oh, no way. I know I'm way closer now to the end of life and entering eternity. I would never want to go back, even how wonderful or special it was. Sometimes we're guilty of living for the past glories and finding satisfaction in memories alone. We are to live when circumstances are exceptional, as though they are not. Which, given any natural pessimist will remind us of that. Don't worry, it'll change. You're happy now. Give it a week, give it a year. Wait and see. You'll be sad again. No, we won't. Because my true joy was never based in this temporal happening. We are to live when circumstances are exceptional, as though they are not. All is subject to change and will change. We're all right with that. We're good with that, right? Everything's subject to change, and it will change. That's okay. None of us is thinking, I hope it doesn't change, I hope it doesn't change. Nothing wrong with just being pleased in the moment, but we're not so pleased that we can't imagine change coming. That's okay. We're not living for it anyway. And boy, when we step into eternity, there'll be no change. No threat of change, no fear, no dread, no grief, full satisfaction, unending satisfaction. Yeah, I don't want anything to compete with that. So we're living our time here in light of our eternal state and what we're doing in the time we've been given to glorify our Lord, who will stand before us someday as we enter into eternity. That's what life is about. Wonderful place to stick this right in the discussion of marriage, because for many it becomes the main focal point of life. And Paul's just saying in so many ways, not really. We'll celebrate Saturday in a marriage. It'll be wonderful. It's a covenant. It's a wonderful concept. It's God's institution. It is something genuinely to celebrate. Be a happy time, very happy time. But even with that, it doesn't compare with the joy that's yet to come. And that's a good thing. Because when you think, wow, life's pretty good, this is all right, it'll still get better. And that's what drives us moving forward, even with the threat, the absolute assuredness of change. Let's pray. Father, thank you for this. Thank you for this solid reminder where our focus ought to be at all times. How wonderful we have it to know this. And to know that these things are passing away, and this is a good thing for us to constantly see and be reminded of, to keep us focused on the best truly yet to come, even when it's really good, even when it's grievous here, that we will always live with those eternal values in view. This we thank you for. In Jesus' name, amen. If we could have some of our healthy, strong, energetic, even if you're not energetic, people help us start to clear out the tables for the celebration we were just talking about and get the auditorium at least generally fit for decorations. The pulpit will need to go. Again, the Lord's table will need to go. But the table's downstairs, first priority. Those online, thank you very much for joining us. Hopefully you have a good evening. Many you will see maybe Saturday and the rest on Sunday also. Clayton's feel like they're painting in the dark. Yeah, that'll probably need to go. Well, we don't want anything out in the entryway either, so maybe back in Daniel's area. Yeah, I don't think so. Probably not a good idea.
No one's gonna look back there. Stop being lazy, Tim.
I'm just trying to think because Canada.
You too, Will. This is your event.
Right, as little as possible because they've got to get back there.
I say just use one. Have they come on either side of it and sign like a contract or something?
I think the pulpit can still go back there
I'm gonna look back there and see.
and see, you have to maneuver that. A lot of other stuff's just going to have to go downstairs. I could ask, quick work. Hey Sarah, you want to come get the equipment here?